Nothing says absolute commitment to fiscal responsibility like going way over your budget, knowing that the Republicans will give you as much money as you ask for because they like what you're doing. And here, of course, I'm talking about the DHS and specifically with ICE, which apparently is $1 billion over budget already. And it's only gonna get worse from here with how fired up Stephen Miller is getting over the past couple of weeks. Apparently, they could run out of money at ICE next month. And so, I mean, they're spending a lot of money because they're going into all of these areas, and like some of these deployments are going to take a lot longer and require more manpower than previously expected because of the protests they're now facing. Now, in theory, you could save some money by not instigating conflicts with localities all over the country, but Donald Trump seems to like this sort of thing, so expect more of it as these protests spread. So it is probably gonna require a lot more money going to ICE. Apparently, DHS has been taking some proactive steps recently. They moved $500 million from within its own funds to support the mass deportation scheme. I'm sure, by the way, that 500 million wasn't going to anything important, so don't worry about that. You can take $500 million and it doesn't really matter. This is the only threat to the American people, never forget that. The agency has requested an extra $2 billion to meet its needs by the end of September. And there's also, apparently, I didn't know about this. There's an anti-deficiency act, which bans agencies from obligating or spending federal funds that have not been congressionally appropriated. No one has ever been charged under that, but theoretically they could. So you could have someone in ICE brought up on charges. I find that unlikely. I don't think Pam Bondi's gonna do that anytime soon. But anyway, they're trying to raise the number of daily deportations to like 3,000 a day, which is very difficult and very expensive. And so they're gonna require a lot more money. And that money, certainly they're already talking about budgeting that for future years, but they're not waiting to ramp up the deportations, Alex. So it seems like they're gonna need some sort of, I don't know, a small piece of legislation to ram this through. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, Trump's way of doing things is basically to ask for forgiveness, not permission. That's his operating philosophy. And so I'm just gonna do it, and there's a threat, and we'll figure out the bills later. I mean, it's not exactly like throughout his life, paying people on time has been a huge theme, right?
Yeah,
it's like
true.
do what he needs to do. The other thing that, and there's been so much made here in California about this fight over the National Guard. And the real reason it seems to be that the National Guard was brought in here was not to protect the federal building so they could just stand there in a line. The real reason is because they want the National Guard to go out with ICE and be basically a protecting force for them, to do security for ICE raids. That's why they wanted to bring him in for 60 days. That's why they're testing this legal theory. That's why they're hoping the Supreme Court gives them cover to do this. Because if they could essentially nationalize or federalize National Guards in other states and go through a similar model where they could use that as a way. It maybe minimizes some of the cost to ICE because they can spread it out on a budget sheet so that it doesn't all go in one place, so it doesn't look like it's as big of an expense, and it helps make the process potentially cheaper for ICE and make ICE safer. Now, of course, the Republican response would be if these sanctuary cities and sanctuary states would work with us, and we could do this in the jails, and we could do this in a much easier, much cheaper, much safer way. Obviously, Democratic states say, well, we don't believe in that. We think that sanctuary policy is important to create trust in the community. But I think that there's a lot of that going on. And I think that military thing's an important part of it.
Can I ask you a question? So, and I should know the answer to this, but so in this case, Trump federalizes the California National Guard without the request of Gavin Newsom. Right. So are we footing the bill for their deployment for this, or is that then passed on to the federal government who's obligating them to engage in these maneuvers?
I'm not sure. And I think that's an interesting question, right? Who's paying for them now? Because theoretically before, California would pay for the.
Yeah.
So now how is that budget being moved? But my guess is if you're looking at the budget in Congress, even if it is both federal government expenditures, if it's of a different budget line, National Guard and ICE, that may be easier for them to sort of hide stuff or move stuff around in terms of not having, like you just reported, this massive, over budget number for ICE.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, there's a couple ways you could try to resolve this. I have a while. I'm not an expert, obviously. I'm not an elected official. I would say we don't spend billions and billions of dollars clearing day laborers out of Home Depot parking lots, and we save a bunch of money and put it into actual crises. That would be my idea, but I've never been elected to anything. Also, a quick update, two quick updates. So one quick update on a story we talked about, I believe yesterday in the show, was Donald Trump indicating that the new sort of ramp up in mass deportations at like farms and restaurants and hotels, let's not do that. They're apparently, that's not actually government policy. Apparently, the ICE officials, Homeland Security, they're saying that no, they're still ramping up in those areas, which I'm not super surprised by. I feel like Stephen Miller is tapped into what's actually being done a lot more than Donald Trump with the social media activity. That said, maybe he'll put some pressure on them in the future. Also, we just got a heads up from a member from Canadian in Hawaii. We're gonna look into this. We'll see. But one of the New York mayoral candidates was apparently detained by ICE. So it's I believe he's the current controller, I believe, of New York City. So yeah, there's no peace from these developments.
Yeah, I mean, and there's every indication that Trump plans to ramp it up. I mean, that whole idea, you kind of got a sense last week when he said maybe we don't go into farms and hotels, including maybe some of his places, where they may or may not have employed some illegal people in the past, and then you thought maybe things are going to get not as bad, but then you see they're changing that policy. He puts out a very, very inflammatory statement saying we're going to target blue states and blue cities and basically doubling down on this policy. So for those that were hoping that we kind of were past this and maybe we could take a deep breath, it seems like Trump is saying the opposite and seems to think that it is to his personal political benefit to keep this conflict going. I wonder though if the Iran thing distracts him, honestly, because it becomes such a big story. Will the ICE thing sort of not be as front and center in his mind because he's busy doing something else? And could there actually lead to the cooling of the temperature in some of these blue cities?
I think that's a plausible theory, but also maybe if it's less front of mind for him, maybe he's less in charge of what's being done.
Right, and Stephen Miller
maybe it falls to Stephen Miller or Holman or yeah, I don't know.
If you enjoyed that, make sure that you never miss another video by subscribing. And if you want a little more, consider hitting the join button and becoming an actual member. But you're probably wondering, why the hell would I do that, John? First off, calm down. The stakes in this are very, very low. But also, when you click the join button and you become a member, you get access to bonus content that I make every week, and it's a ton of fun. You get access to tons of custom emojis and more besides that. By the way, if you join at tier 3, you even get access to a monthly member hangout with myself and other awesome people, and we always have a great time. By the way, you'll get all that going forward, but you also unlock years of the back catalog. That is literally 100 or more bonus clips, top 10 lists, debates, and more. What are you waiting for? Click the join button below. Your support powers our show, and we couldn't do it without you. Or at the very least, I wouldn't really want to try. Viewers like you keep me here. So thank you in advance for joining.